Are you sure you want to let that man in here? Mrs. Morrison's voice cut through the cemetery silence like a sharp knife. Look at him. We all know who he is, what he does. Michael Castellano stopped halfway down the stone path, hands buried deep in the pockets of his impeccable black coat. He was 42 years old, with scars nobody could see beneath his expensive clothes, and a reputation that made grown men cross the street when they saw him coming. Head of one of the most feared families on the East Coast, Michael wasn't the type of person who showed up at funerals of ordinary people, but there he was. George Whitmore's funeral was taking place on a cold November morning. Michael had come only to observe from a distance, perhaps pay his respects silently. George was a name he knew well, a powerful businessman who had crossed his path years ago, under circumstances Michael preferred not to remember. George's family gathered near the chapel, dressed in expensive black with faces that mixed mourning and impatience. Nobody seemed genuinely sad, just tired of waiting. And then she arrived. A pregnant woman, clearly in her 8th month, stepped out of an old car and began walking toward the family group. Her black dress was simple, cheap. Her shoes worn. But there was a dignity about her that made Michael pay attention. Eliza. The icy voice came from a tall woman in expensive sunglasses. You weren't invited. Leave before I call security. The pregnant woman, Eliza, stopped. Her hands trembled slightly over her round belly. I just wanted to say goodbye to him, she said quietly, her voice breaking. That's all. Then I'll leave. You chose to leave this family, a man in a gray suit spat the words. Now deal with the consequences. Nobody moved to help her. The entire family literally turned their backs as if Eliza were invisible. Michael saw when her knees began to give way. Saw the exact moment when the color drained from her face, her eyes rolling back slightly. She was fainting, and nobody was doing anything. Michael moved before thinking. His steps were quick, silent, a lifetime habit of avoiding being noticed when he didn't want to be. He reached Eliza exactly as she started to fall, his strong arms catching her before she hit the concrete ground. Hey, Michael murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. Easy. I've got you. Eliza blinked, confused, looking at the stranger's face holding her. Michael guided her to a nearby bench, sat her down carefully. He took off his own coat, Italian silk must have cost $5,000, and placed it over her shoulders. Breathe deep, he said. You're okay. Just breathe. One of the cemetery security guards brought water. Michael took it, opened the bottle, handed it to Eliza. She drank slowly, her hands still shaking. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what happened, You don't need to explain anything, Michael interrupted softly. Just rest a bit. The Whitmore family watched from a distance, with expressions ranging from shock to contempt. Michael didn't care. He'd seen enough hatred in his life to recognize when he was being judged. Eliza sat for a few minutes, regaining color in her face. Michael stayed nearby, quiet, just making sure she was okay. When the funeral began inside, she looked at the chapel with a sadness so deep that Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Was he important to you? Michael asked quietly. He was everything, Eliza replied, her voice broken. He raised me when my parents died. He was my uncle, but became my grandfather. And now? She swallowed hard. Now they won't even let me say goodbye to him. Michael said nothing, just nodded, understanding. When Eliza finally stood up to leave, she looked at Michael for a long moment. There was something strange in her eyes, something that looked like recognition. He was right about you, she said suddenly. Michael frowned. Who? But Eliza just shook her head, returned his coat, and walked back to the old car. Michael stood there watching her drive away with a strange feeling in his chest, as if something important had just happened, but he didn't know exactly what. 3 hours later, someone knocked on Michael's apartment door. He opened it, already with his hand near the gun he always carried at his waist. But the person standing there was a man in an expensive suit, leather briefcase in hand, professional expression. "Michael Castellano?" the man asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Reed. I'm the attorney for George Whitmore's estate." He paused. "May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you." Michael let him in, suspicious. Lawyers never brought good news to men like him. Thomas sat down, opened the briefcase, pulled out documents. His expression was serious, but there was something like admiration, respect. "Mr. Castellano, Mr. Whitmore passed away 2 days ago. The funeral you attended today was his final ceremony." "I know," Michael said, impatient. "So what?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Mr. Whitmore left very specific instructions in his will. He left you his entire fortune, approximately $500 million. The silence that fell over the room was so heavy that Michael could hear his own heart beating. "Is this some kind of joke?" Michael asked, his voice dangerously low. "It's not a joke, Mr. Castellano. It's real." Michael stood up, walked to the window, looked at the street below. Cars passing, people living their normal lives. And he, a man who had spent his entire life on the wrong side of the law, had just inherited $500 million from a stranger. Why? Was all he could ask. Thomas opened an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "He asked me to give this to you." Michael took the letter with hands that didn't tremble. He had too much control for that, but that held the paper with a force that almost tore it. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means you did the right thing. It means you helped Eliza when she needed it. It means you're still the man I met 15 years ago. You saved my life that night. You don't know this, but you did. And I spent the last 15 years watching you from afar, waiting to see if that moment of kindness was real or just luck. It was real. You are real. My family only knows how to take. You, despite everything you've done in life, still know how to give. Use this money to be better than I was, to prove that people can change. I trust you. George Whitmore." Michael read the letter 3 times, then looked at Thomas. He's serious. Completely. And for the first time in 15 years, Michael Castellano, Mafia boss, man who had done terrible things, who had blood on his hands and demons in his conscience, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. If you're enjoying this story about how a simple gesture can change everything, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the universe has plans we can't even imagine. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, rereading George Whitmore's letter, until he'd memorized every word. $500 million. A fortune he never imagined having legally. The irony wasn't lost on him. Michael had spent 20 years building an empire in the shadows. Loans, protection, businesses nobody asked where they came from. He had money, yes, but it was dirty money, always was. Money that came with blood and threats. And now an old businessman he'd saved once without even knowing who he was left him $500 million clean. The next morning his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Castellano?" It was Eliza's voice, the pregnant woman from the funeral. "Sorry to call so early. Thomas gave me your number. Can we talk?" "About what?" "About George. About why he did this. About what you need to know before the family comes after you." An hour later, Michael sat in a small cafe across town. Eliza was already there, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, eyes tired. "Thanks for coming," she said when Michael sat down. "You said the family's coming after me." Eliza nodded. "Victoria and Alexander, George's children. They expected to inherit everything. When they find out you got their fortune, they'll try to destroy you." "Let them try," Michael said, emotionless. "You don't understand." Eliza leaned forward. "They have powerful lawyers, political connections. They'll turn your entire life inside out looking for something to use against you. And they'll find it, won't they?" Michael didn't answer, but they both knew the answer. "George knew who you were," Eliza continued softly. "Knew about your past, knew about the things you did, and still chose you. Why? Because you saved him twice. Eliza took a deep breath. 15 years ago, there was a fire in a parking garage. You pulled a man out of a burning car. It was George. Michael felt an old memory surface. The heat, the black smoke, screams. He was leaving a meeting when he saw the car catching fire. Someone was inside, unconscious. Michael broke the window, dragged the old man out, waited for the firefighters to arrive, then left because he didn't want to explain what he was doing in that building at that hour. I didn't know it was him, Michael said quietly. He found out who you were, spent the last 15 years watching you, saw you help people who couldn't pay you back, saw you give money to single mothers, saw you pay hospital bills for families who didn't even know you. That's different, Michael murmured. Is it? Eliza tilted her head. You're a mafia boss, Michael, but you're also human. George saw that underneath all the violence, there was still kindness. Silence stretched between them. And the second time? Michael asked. 3 years ago. My father, George's brother, was hit by a car near a school. He was lying in the middle of the street, a truck was coming. You dragged him to the sidewalk, saved his life. Michael remembered. A man on a motorcycle, dazed, bleeding. Traffic still coming. Michael was on his way to collect a debt. He stopped the car, ran, pulled the guy to safety. The ambulance arrived. Michael left. My God, Michael whispered. You saved George and my father, 2 members of the Whitmore family, and never asked for anything, never bragged, just helped. Eliza wiped a tear. George told me he was going to leave everything to you if you were still the same man. Yesterday at the funeral was the final test. When you helped me, you proved you were. Does your family hate you because of me? No. They hate me because I chose love over money. Eliza touched her belly. My husband was a teacher, made little money. The family said he was unworthy. They kicked me out. 6 months ago he died in a car accident, and now I'm alone, pregnant, with nothing. Michael felt anger rise in his chest. Not at her, at a family that could abandon someone so easily. What do you want from me? He asked. Nothing, Eliza said, and he believed her. I just wanted you to know the truth before they come. Because they will come, Michael. And they'll say terrible things. They'll try to make you feel like you don't deserve this. Maybe I don't. George thought you did. That's enough for me. That afternoon the knock came. Hard, angry. Michael opened the door. 2 people stood there. The tall woman from the funeral and the man in the tailored suit. Victoria and Alexander Whitmore. Victoria didn't wait to be invited. She pushed past Michael into the apartment. So this is where you live? She said, looking around with obvious disgust. Charming. Alexander followed her, calmer but colder. He looked at Michael like he was examining an insect. Mr. Castellano, Alexander said, we need to talk. I don't think we do, Michael replied. Victoria laughed. It was sharp and mean. You think you're somebody now? A mobster who runs illegal operations? You think you can just take our family's fortune? I didn't take anything, Michael said. George gave it. Our father was dying, Alexander said quietly. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was manipulated. By who? By me? By Eliza? By whoever convinced him to betray his own children? Michael felt his anger rising but kept his voice steady. I never even met your father, not in any way that mattered. That's the problem, Alexander said. He stepped closer. My father built that company from nothing. Do you understand that? He started with a single property and turned it into an empire. That's his legacy. That's our family's legacy. And you think you can just walk in and take it because you pulled him out of a burning car? I didn't ask for any of this. Then refuse it, Victoria snapped. Sign the papers, give it back, walk away. Michael looked at both of them. He saw their anger, yes, but underneath it he saw something else. Pain, the kind that came from feeling unloved by someone you desperately wanted to impress. Your father didn't leave you the money because he didn't love you, Michael said slowly. He left it to me because he wanted you to learn something. Learn what? Alexander's jaw was tight. That money isn't what makes you good enough. Victoria's face flushed red. Don't you dare lecture us about our father. You didn't know him. You're right, I didn't. But maybe that's the point. Alexander took a step back. His voice dropped. We're going to fight this. We have lawyers, resources. You'll spend years in court. You'll lose everything trying to defend this. Is that what you want? I don't want to fight anyone, Michael said. Then don't, Victoria replied. Walk away today and we'll forget this ever happened. They left without waiting for an answer, but Michael knew they'd be back. And next time, they'd bring weapons he couldn't fight with fists. Every enemy he'd made, every law he'd broken, every dark corner of his life, they'd drag it all into the light and use it to prove he didn't deserve George's gift. And the worst part? Maybe they were right. The next 3 days were hell. Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Private investigators started following him. His legitimate businesses, the ones that were actually clean, suddenly faced health inspections, tax audits, and zoning violations they'd never had before. The Whitmore family was moving fast. On the 4th day, Michael met with Thomas Reed in his office downtown. They're coming at you with everything, Thomas said, spreading documents across his desk. They've filed a motion to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and mental incapacity. They're claiming George wasn't of sound mind when he changed his will. Was he? Michael asked. He was sharper than most men half his age, Thomas replied firmly. But proving that in court, against their legal team, that's going to be a war. Michael leaned back in his chair. What do I need to do? Stay clean. From this moment forward, every move you make will be scrutinized. Every business dealing, every phone call, every meeting. They'll dig up your past, Michael. Everything you've done. Can you handle that becoming public? Michael's jaw tightened. His past wasn't something you put on display. There were things he'd done, people he'd hurt, lines he'd crossed. If all of that came out. I don't have a choice, do I? You always have a choice, Thomas said. You can walk away, give them the money, go back to your life. Michael thought about George's letter, about the old man who'd watched him for 15 years, waiting to see if one moment of kindness was real or just luck, about Eliza, abandoned by her family for choosing love, about the trust George had placed in him. No, Michael said, I'm not walking away. Thomas nodded. Then we fight. But you need to understand something. They won't just attack the will. They'll attack you. Your character, your business, your entire life. Are you ready for that? I've been fighting my whole life, Michael said. This is just a different kind of war. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael did something he'd never done before. He started cleaning up his life. Not the surface, the deep, ugly parts he'd been ignoring for years. He called in his lieutenants, the men who ran his operations. Men who'd been with him for a decade, who'd done things with him they'd never speak about. I'm stepping back, Michael told them. The loan sharking, the protection rackets, all of it, I'm out. They stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Boss, what are you talking about? Tony, his oldest friend, asked. We've got territories, agreements, people depending on us. I'm not shutting anything down, Michael said. I'm just not going to be part of it anymore. You guys can run it without me or shut it down. I don't care, but I can't be connected to it. This is about that money, isn't it? Tony's voice was hard. That old man's fortune. You're going legit. Maybe. They're never going to let you keep it, Mike. You know that, right? Men like us don't get happy endings. We don't get to just walk away and live normal lives. Maybe not, Michael agreed. But I'm going to try. Tony shook his head, disgusted. But he didn't argue. None of them did. Michael had been their boss too long, had earned too much loyalty for them to fight him on this. But walking away from that life wasn't simple. There were people who owed him money, people he owed favors to, agreements that couldn't just be broken. Michael spent the next week untangling himself from years of complicated illegal relationships. It was exhausting and dangerous. Some people didn't take kindly to him backing out. On the 15th day, someone shot at his car. The bullet went through the back window, missing his head by inches. Michael didn't flinch. He'd been shot at before, but this time felt different. This time, he realized, he actually wanted to survive. He called Eliza that night. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Yeah. Someone took a shot at me. Missed." "My God, Michael. Maybe you should walk away from this. The money isn't worth your life." "It's not about the money anymore," Michael said quietly. "It's about proving I can be something different, that I'm not just what I've always been." "You've always been more than that," Eliza said softly. "George saw it. I see it. You just need to see it yourself." That night, Michael sat alone in his apartment, thinking about who he was and who he wanted to be. He'd spent 20 years building a reputation as someone dangerous, someone to be feared. And now he was trying to become someone worthy of a gift from a man who'd believed in second chances. The next morning, Thomas called. "I have someone who wants to meet you. Her name is Rebecca Martinez. She's a forensic accountant, specializes in inheritance cases." "Why do I need her?" "Because if we're going to win this, we need to prove George was of sound mind and that you didn't manipulate him. Rebecca can help us build that case. But she needs to know everything about you, Michael. And I mean everything." Michael met Rebecca 2 days later. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made it clear she didn't scare easily. "Mr. Castellano," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "I've reviewed your file. I'll be honest, your background makes this case complicated." "I know what I am," Michael said. "Good. Then let's talk about how we prove that despite what you are, George Whitmore made a rational, informed decision to leave you his fortune." They spent the next 6 hours going through everything. Every business Michael owned, every person he'd worked with, every gray area of his life. Rebecca didn't judge. She just took notes, asked questions, built a picture of who he really was. At the end, she sat back and said, "You've done bad things, Mr. Castellano, but you've also done good things. A lot of good things. We can work with that." "How?" "By showing the pattern George saw, the people you've helped over the years, the families you've supported, the acts of kindness you thought nobody noticed. George noticed, and we're going to make sure the court sees what he saw." For the first time since this whole thing started, Michael felt like he might actually have a chance. But that night, Victoria Whitmore appeared on the local news, standing in front of the courthouse, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. "My father was a great man," she said to the cameras, "and in his final days he was taken advantage of by someone with a criminal background, someone who saw an opportunity and seized it. We will not let Michael Castellano steal our family's legacy. Justice will be served." Michael watched the broadcast from his apartment. He saw the comments flooding in online. People who didn't know him, didn't know George, making judgments about whether a mobster deserved an inheritance. His phone rang. It was Eliza. "Don't listen to them," she said. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself." "Too late," Michael said. "George left you a second video," Eliza said suddenly. "He told me to show it to you if you ever started to give up. Can I bring it over?" An hour later, she was at his door with a USB drive. They plugged it into his laptop. George Whitmore appeared on screen, even weaker than in the first video, but his eyes still fierce. "Michael," George said, "if you're watching this, it means they're trying to break you, trying to make you believe you're not worthy. But let me tell you something about worth. It's not about where you came from. It's about where you're going. You saved my life and asked for nothing. That's worth more than any fortune I could leave you. Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare let my children win because you think you don't deserve this. You do. Now prove it." The video ended. Michael sat in silence, Eliza beside him, and made his decision. He wasn't walking away. He was fighting. Not because he wanted the money, but because George had believed in him when nobody else did, and he wouldn't let that belief die with the old man. If you want to see how this battle unfolds and whether Michael can prove he's worthy of George's trust, make sure you subscribe. Because what happens next will show you that sometimes the greatest fights aren't won with fists. They're won with truth. The courtroom was packed. Media everywhere. Cameras lined the hallway outside. Michael walked in wearing a suit Thomas had insisted he buy. Expensive, tailored, respectable. He barely recognized himself. Victoria and Alexander Whitmore sat on the other side with their legal team. 4 lawyers, all from prestigious firms. They looked confident. They looked like they'd already won. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patricia Morrison, called the courtroom to order. "We're here to determine the validity of George Whitmore's will," she said. "The petitioners claim their father was not of sound mind when he made changes to his estate 6 months before his death. Let's proceed." Alexander's lead attorney stood. His name was Richard Blackwell, and his reputation preceded him. He'd never lost an inheritance case. "Your Honor," Blackwell began, "George Whitmore built an empire over 40 years. He was a devoted father and grandfather, and in his final months suffering from terminal cancer, heavily medicated, he was manipulated into disinheriting his children in favor of a complete stranger, a stranger with a documented criminal history." He turned to face Michael. "Michael Castellano runs illegal operations, loan sharking, extortion, racketeering. He's been investigated multiple times, and while he's avoided conviction through intimidation and witness tampering, we all know what he is. The question is, why would a dying man give his entire fortune to such a person unless he was coerced or mentally incapacitated?" The courtroom murmured. Michael felt everyone's eyes on him. Judging, condemning. Thomas stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Castellano has never been convicted of any crime. This is character assassination, not evidence." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Blackwell, stick to the facts." But the damage was done. Michael could see it in the faces of the people watching. Blackwell called witnesses, doctors who'd treated George in his final months. They testified about the pain medication, the confusion, the moments of disorientation. "He didn't always know what day it was," one doctor said. "He'd forget conversations we'd had an hour earlier." Then Victoria took the stand. She cried. Real tears, Michael noticed. Maybe she really had loved her father in her own way. "My father and I had a complicated relationship," she said. "But I loved him. We all did. And to see him manipulated in his final days, to see everything he built given away to a criminal." She broke down. "It's heartbreaking." The courtroom was sympathetic. Michael could feel the tide turning against him. When it was their turn, Thomas called Rebecca Martinez first. She presented a detailed analysis of George's financial records, showing that all changes to the will were made during periods when George was fully alert, not medicated, and in consultation with multiple attorneys. George Whitmore was meticulous, Rebecca testified. Every decision was documented, reviewed, and confirmed. This was not the act of a confused man. This was deliberate. Then Thomas called Eliza. She walked to the stand, 8 months pregnant, moving slowly. The courtroom watched her with curiosity. "Ms. Whitmore," Thomas began, "you were close to George?" "He raised me," Eliza said. "After my parents died, he became my grandfather in every way that mattered." "And he told you about his plans for his estate?" "Yes. 6 months before he died, he called me to the hospital. He told me he was leaving everything to Michael Castellano." "Why?" "Because Michael saved his life, twice, and because George had been watching Michael for 15 years. He saw something in him that he didn't see in his own children. Selflessness." Victoria's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This is hearsay." "Your Honor," Thomas said calmly, "Ms. Whitmore is testifying to statements made by the deceased regarding his intentions. This is directly relevant to his state of mind." "Overruled," Judge Morrison said. "Continue." Eliza looked at Victoria and Alexander. "George didn't leave you out because he didn't love you. He left you out because he wanted you to learn that money doesn't make you a good person. Kindness does. And Michael has that. You don't." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel. "Order." Then Thomas did something unexpected. He called Michael to the stand. Michael walked up, was sworn in, sat down. His heart was pounding, but his face was calm. Years of never showing fear had trained him well. "Mr. Castellano," Thomas began, "tell us about the day you saved George Whitmore." "It was 15 years ago. I was leaving a meeting in an office building. There was a fire in the parking garage. I saw a car burning, heard someone screaming. I broke the window, pulled him out, waited for help to arrive. Then I left." "Why did you leave?" "I didn't want questions about what I was doing there." "And did you know who he was?" "No. He was just a man who needed help." "And the second time?" 3 years ago. A man was lying in the street after a motorcycle accident. Traffic was still coming. I pulled him to safety. I found out later it was David Whitmore, George's brother. Thomas walked closer. "Mr. Castellano, I'll ask you directly. Are you a criminal?" The courtroom went silent. Michael looked at the judge, then at Victoria and Alexander, then at Eliza. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said quietly. "I've broken laws, I've hurt people. I've lived in the shadows for 20 years. But I've also tried to help people when I could. I've given money to families who needed it. I've paid for surgeries, rent, food. Not because I wanted credit, just because. Because I saw people suffering and I had the means to help." "Why?" Thomas asked. "Because my mother raised me to believe that no matter what you do for a living, you're still human, and humans take care of each other." Thomas pulled out a folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of Mr. Castellano's charitable acts over the past 15 years. He handed copies to the judge and to Blackwell. "These are receipts, bank transfers, and witness statements documenting over 200 instances of Michael Castellano helping people. Single mothers whose rent he paid, families whose medical bills he covered, veterans he helped get off the streets, all anonymous, all without expectation of repayment." Blackwell flipped through the documents, his face darkening. Thomas continued. "George Whitmore saw these acts. He documented them. He had private investigators confirm them. And he made a conscious, rational decision that this man, despite his flaws, deserved his fortune more than his own children who'd never learned to give without taking." Judge Morrison studied the documents. "This is substantial." Then Thomas played the video. George's final message, recorded 3 days before he died. The courtroom watched George Whitmore, frail and dying, explain exactly why he'd chosen Michael. His voice was weak, but his words were clear and powerful. "Michael Castellano saved my life and disappeared. He helped my brother and disappeared. He spent 15 years helping people and disappearing. He doesn't do good things for recognition. He does them because it's who he is. My children do nothing unless there's something to gain. That's my failure as a father. But Michael is my chance to do something right. He'll use this fortune to help people. I trust him, and I hope someday my children will understand why." When the video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Victoria was crying. Alexander's jaw was clenched tight. Judge Morrison sat back. "I've seen enough. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment waiting. At 7 a.m., his phone rang. "Thomas, we won." Michael's hand tightened on the phone. "What?" "Judge Morrison ruled in our favor. George was of sound mind. The will stands. The inheritance is yours." Michael sat down slowly. "It's over. It's over. You did it, Michael." Michael hung up and just sat there. $500 million. It was his, legally his, and he had no idea what to do with it. 6 months later, the George Whitmore Foundation officially opened its doors. The building was in a modest neighborhood, not fancy, but clean and welcoming. Inside, families filled out applications for rent assistance, medical grants, and job training programs. Volunteers helped children with homework while their parents met with financial counselors. Michael stood near the entrance watching. He was dressed simply now, jeans, a button-down shirt, no more expensive suits. No more trying to look like something he wasn't. Eliza walked over carrying her baby son. She'd named him George, after the man who'd given both of them a second chance. "He would have loved this," she said, looking around at the busy foundation. I hope so, Michael replied. A young woman approached them, timid. Mr. Castellano? Michael turned. Yes? I wanted to thank you. My daughter needed surgery, I couldn't afford it. Your foundation paid for everything. She's healthy now. Because of you. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Michael felt his chest tighten. You don't need to thank me, he said quietly. Just take care of her. That's enough. The woman nodded and walked away. Eliza smiled. You say that every time. You know that? Someone thanks you, and you tell them it's not necessary. It isn't, Michael said. George gave me this money. I'm just passing it on. You're doing more than that, Eliza said. You're proving he was right about you. Over the following months, the foundation grew. They helped over 300 families in the first year alone. Single parents who were drowning in debt, kids who needed medical care, veterans struggling to find housing, people who'd been forgotten by everyone else. Michael was there almost every day, not as a boss or a benefactor, but as someone who understood what it meant to struggle. He'd meet with families, listen to their stories, help however he could. The media noticed. Stories started appearing about the reformed mobster-turned-philanthropist. Some people praised him. Others said it was just a PR move, a way to clean his image. Michael didn't care. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He was doing it because George had trusted him, and he refused to waste that trust. One afternoon, a familiar face walked into the foundation. Alexander Whitmore. Michael tensed. They hadn't spoken since the trial. Michael, Alexander said, extending his hand. Michael shook it, wary. Alexander. I wanted to see it, Alexander said, looking around. The foundation. What you're doing with our father's money. It's not your father's money anymore, Michael said. It's theirs. He gestured to the families filling the lobby. Alexander nodded slowly. You're right. He took a breath. I owe you an apology. I thought you were just taking advantage. I didn't understand what our father saw in you. But I do now. What changed? I spent the last 6 months thinking about what he said in that video, that we only know how to take. And he was right. We never learned to give. We never learned that wealth means nothing if you're empty inside. Alexander's voice cracked slightly. Victoria and I have been talking. We want to help. We want to work with the foundation, contribute, learn from you. Michael studied him. Why? Because our father gave us one last chance to become better people, and we don't want to waste it. Over the next year, Alexander and Victoria became involved with the foundation. At first it was awkward. They didn't know how to talk to the families, didn't understand their struggles. But slowly they learned. They volunteered, listened, helped. Michael watched them transform, saw the hard edges soften, saw them begin to understand what George had been trying to teach them all along. One day Victoria pulled Michael aside. I need to tell you something. What? I hated you, she said simply. When we lost the trial, I hated you more than I've ever hated anyone. I thought you'd stolen my father from me. And now I realize he was never stolen. He was just waiting for me to become someone worthy of his love. And I'm trying, because of you. Michael didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. A year after the foundation opened, they held an anniversary ceremony. The small building was packed. Families they'd helped came to celebrate. Local officials gave speeches. The media covered it. Michael stood at the podium, uncomfortable with the attention. He'd never been good at speeches. A wise man once told me that wealth isn't measured in money, he began. It's measured in the people you leave behind. George Whitmore left me a fortune. But more than that, he left me a purpose. He showed me that no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, you can still choose to be better. He looked at the crowd. This foundation isn't about me. It's about all of you. The families we've helped, the people who volunteered, the community that supported us. George believed that kindness matters more than money. I'm just trying to prove he was right. When the ceremony ended, Michael walked to his car. Eliza caught up with him, little George in her arms. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Cemetery," Michael said. "Thought I'd visit him." "Mind if we come?" They drove together to the cemetery where it all began. To the grave where Michael had caught Eliza when she fainted. The place where his entire life changed. George Whitmore's headstone was simple but elegant. The inscription read, "A man's wealth is not measured in money, but in the people he leaves behind." Michael knelt, placing flowers at the base. "I'm doing what you asked," he said quietly, speaking to the stone. "I'm using the money to help people. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be. I hope I'm making you proud." Eliza touched his shoulder. "He is proud. I know he is." Baby George cooed, reaching for the flowers. Michael stood. He looked at Eliza and the baby. At the foundation that bore George's name. At the hundreds of families whose lives had changed. And for the first time in his life, Michael Castellano felt like he'd done something truly good. Not because he had to, not because it benefited him, but because a dying man had seen something in him worth saving. "Thank you," Michael whispered to the grave. "For believing in me when nobody else did. For giving me a chance to be more than what I was. I won't waste it." They stood there for a moment longer, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Then they walked back to the car together. Behind them, the cemetery was peaceful. The grave was covered in flowers. And somewhere, Michael thought maybe George Whitmore was watching. Maybe he was smiling. Maybe he was finally at peace, knowing he'd chosen right.